Coming up on the Sports Reporters. It's a fascinating dynamic right now, Wetzel, and I'm just blown away by everything we're seeing.
Conventional wisdom in college athletics is usually dead wrong. I mean, you go back through
And everything the NCAA says
a
ends up being
long history of what are you even talking about?
Welcome to a special edition of the Sports Reporters. We're counting down to the national championship game, Miami versus Indiana. We're talking about the transfer portal, which is the name of the game these days in college football. Just ask Kirk Cignetti. You can Google it. Our distinguished panel today, three keen observers of the college football landscape: Greg McElroy, Dan Murphy, Dan Wetzel. All right, gentlemen, let's get started. And I might say, instead of Dan and Dan, Murphy and Wetzel, just to avoid confusion. Let's start with Wetzel. The ratings are great. All the hand-wringing about the portal and the transfers themselves, all of this flux. Is it much ado about nothing? Is it overblown? What's the problem if people are enjoying the product?
Yeah, the final product's great and has been it really has brought some opportunity to to more programs, Indiana being the perfect example, even Miami, which hasn't been nationally relevant certainly at this level in 25 years. We 5-10 years ago, we would go into a season with maybe 3 teams that could win the national title. And it was basically a rotation of about 6 or 7 teams, depending on who was up, with maybe Alabama, just kind of sitting there always. And so there's a lot more teams that have a chance. It's a far more the parity at the top level is probably more is deeper. There's maybe 12, 15 teams that could win a title every year. It's probably 40 teams that have a legitimate can say, hey, we can do this. And Indiana's that perfect example. They were the losingest program in college football history, and they've gone 27-2 in the last 2 seasons, including 15-0 right now, and utterly dominating their opponents. So the portal has allowed so much more opportunity. It's allowed players to work their way up and shine. You have a guy, the number 1 draft pick, likely number 1 draft pick, Heisman Trophy winner, playing for Indiana, Fernando Mendoza, was a guy who was going to go to Yale out of high school. Not every player, gets Elite 11 opportunities when they're in high school, or are built this way, or tall enough, or grow, or whatever it is, or got scouted in the proper place, or played in the right area. Everyone can kind of move up. So there's an enormous number of positives. There's plenty of fans that feel unnerved about it. I feel like a lot of that is marketing and nobody really sticking up for the system that we have and trying to point out the positives of it. There's a lot of negativity from coaches and administrators and commissioners and all sorts of people.
Because it makes their jobs harder. It just makes
right. They have to work harder. No question. They have to work harder. They also, you won't find too many Power 4 head coaches that have flown commercial in a long time. So there's some benefits to it, but the scope of it has changed. There's a lot of negative perception, but at the end of the day, we're having great games and great competition.
I do think that the long-term risk, though, is while the gap from between the top 4 and the top 40 is a lot smaller than it used to be, and I do think that's way more entertaining. From 40 on to everybody else feels like we might be falling off a cliff. And I hope that whatever happens in the future is that a team that's maybe 60th or 70th still has some way of climbing into that top 40 and eventually working their way up into the top. Keeping that bit of hope alive for every team in college football is really important for the health of the sport from a fan's perspective. And I think the risk, while it is way more entertaining, I think, to have 40 teams in the conversation than like 4 or 5, which is what we had a half a decade ago. The long-term risk is that if it just drops off a cliff and you only ever have 30 or 40 teams in that group, you just have NFL light. I don't think that's good for the long-term future of college football.
Well, one other thing, too, that I find fascinating about Indiana's run in particular, there are a lot of teams that have the resources to go out and spend what you want to spend in order to put together a compelling roster. Texas Tech is an example of that. We've seen a handful of schools that went all in this past season with deep, deep pockets, really high price point rosters. Auburn's an example. Penn State's an example. You can sit here and say, well, the teams with the deepest pockets now have access to the best players, therefore, in turn, will have the best results. That's a counterintuitive way of thinking based on what we've seen from Indiana. It's not like one of those situations where you can go out and put forth the most money and find yourselves playing for the national championship. That's not the way it necessarily works. Culture still matters. So I think this season, because I do think we were losing some fans. I do. I think we were losing some people like, well, my team won't have a chance because we can't write as big a check as an Ohio State or as a Texas or a Texas A&M or a team with a billionaire booster at its backing. But now I think a team like Indiana, and well, by no means do they have a low number when it comes to their roster payroll. It's not necessarily in the same stratosphere as some of the other programs that we've seen. So there is right now, I think we're in a big, I don't want to say a reset, but we're in a finding out period. What works? And that to me is also equally compelling because you can go get a lot of high priced guys that don't come together collectively. And it's a bunch of me guys and there's finger pointing and there's fracturing and splintering in the locker room and it results in an underwhelming season. So yes, I can understand why it's turned some people off. But hope does spring eternal every year because you can change your roster year over year. And you can also figure out maybe we don't need the best players to compete. Maybe we just need the best team. And that's what Indiana's proven to all of us over the last 2 years.
And that's where the revenue share comes in is a big deal. So this year was the first year we had revenue share, direct payments from the school into a collective to pay the play. You know, they got to run a lot of end arounds. But to Greg's point, it's correct. In the past, you did need big money boosters, and so let's say, you know, you're a Wake Forest. How do you sit there? You don't have a billionaire. You don't have this, but you do now have up to $20 million to spend on your roster, and so you can allocate a healthy portion of that directly to the players, and that cuts that down. It also bleeds a lot of it spreads out even more talent. So I agree to Greg's point. There's a little bit of a reset, and I found more fans interested in what I've been calling Portapalooza this year. You know, like you got to market this thing as something good instead of it's like this is backstabbing, you know, quitters, you know, that's how it was instead of being like, hey, this is wild. We just got a guy and the guy could be terrible, but it's like, we got a guy from Texas. He's coming and, you know, they get excited. So I think there is a little bit of a reset and I think Greg's very correct on that.
It's this year, though, in particular, guys, is a unique year. And it started with the rev share because all these programs, in an effort to kind of put their best foot forward in 26 and 25, they all front loaded their deals. So all these programs took what they had in their collective, knowing that there'd be another 20 million, but the football team's getting somewhere between 13 and 14. So they front loaded all their deals. So all these players were paid by the June 30th deadline. So what you did is you essentially put all that money up front. And then in addition to the money that was already paid, now you have the extra 13.5 million. Let's just cut it down the middle to put on top of that, which makes this portal season more than ever before, probably the most lucrative because the pockets are now deeper because you've already prepaid the collective, but you also have the rev share. After this season, it's going to calm down a little bit. There will be some guardrails. The CSC, the collegiate group, is actually policing the NIL. They're overwhelmed with the volume right now, but they started with 3 people that were full-time employees, but the College Sports Commission,
they got to check out every deal that's worth more than $600 bucks,
over $600. And guess what? They're all over $600. So that I think
raise that cap,
they just they couldn't keep up with the volume. But right now is the craziest, I think, and maybe I'm naive, and I probably am. I think this is the craziest time that we'll ever see in college football. And from this point forward, it'll be on a slow downward trajectory or a kind of a downward spiral back into a point in which it's somewhat formulaic because right now there's no holds bar. It's anything goes.
Well, that's if, right, Dan Murphy, and this is, you know, something you have covered extensively. That's if the House settlement holds what started on July 1st. But
I don't know that volume is the CSC's biggest problem. I still don't think they have the legal backbone they need to be as effective as they need to be. And I think a lot of the people that either run the CSC or college sports will tell you that in an honest moment. Like Yes, we may be heading back towards something more stable, but I do think we are one big lawsuit away from being thrown right back into the mix at any point moving forward. The House settlement and the cap that's been set up has always been designed to be step one of a two-step process. In the eyes of the people that run college sports, step two of that process is getting Congress to step in and rewrite a rule that allows them to enforce everything that goes on with the CSC and this cap, and to try to reel people back in a little bit and create more of an equal playing field. So far, the attempts in the last 6 months for Congress to do anything have been the same as the attempts in the last 6 years. They've talked about it a lot, they've beaten it to death, and they've gotten absolutely nowhere when it came time to actually do something. Maybe they get some momentum, maybe that never happens. True stability either comes through Congress or a collective bargaining agreement. Right now, the NCAA and the people that run college sports are only interested in one of those two things. Otherwise, I do think that, yeah, we might get through a little bit more stability, but you're only anybody pushing over one legal domino away from being thrown right back into chaos.
What is the Curt Cignetti story over the course of the last 2 seasons? What he has achieved, even at this point, and there's more to be achieved. What does it say about what you can do if you master this new landscape, this new system, Greg?
Well, it says that overall talent isn't actually what wins championships. As crazy as that may sound, we have been brainwashed. And frankly, I'm fall victim to it every day. As an Alabama alumnus, I'm constantly keeping up with what Alabama's doing in the portal. And when a 4-star goes elsewhere, I'm devastated. You know what I mean? Like, oh, how can he not? You know, it's like my brother-in-law group chat's going bananas. It's like, all right, relax, guys. Like, it's going to be fine. We have been brainwashed for a very long time in college football that the only way to win is to have the best players. And I think Curt Cignetti has kind of changed that narrative just ever so slightly. Now they have amazing.
There's also
players.
a difference between somebody who's the best player when they're 17 and somebody who's the best player when they're 20, right?
For sure. And there's a
25.
physical maturity gap that now
25.
exists between a 23-year-old player and an 18-year-old player. And the developmentally, and we've seen this in the NFL, and maybe I'm, as someone that entered the NFL in the midst of a lockout, and in that lockout, some of the concessions given up by owners were no more two-a-days. We're going to increase the practice squad. We're going to have less preseason practices. We're going to have less padded practices. We're going to have different OTA structure. So it really hurt development in the NFL. And I'm seeing that now in college. These programs can no longer practice the way they once practiced because they simply don't have the bodies. They are thinner. They're younger. And they can't practice with the level of intensity that we practiced with because, God forbid, you lost a guy. The next man up, there's a big gap between that starter and that backup. So, yes, while developmentally that's altered our mindset significantly. So getting the 23-year-old guy that's ready-made and ready to go is significant. But you also run the risk, too, of not having great buy-in, not having great scheme understanding when you go get a guy that hasn't been with you for a very long time. So what they do at Indiana, in my impressions and having been around the program and known Cignetti for a long time, he wants highly cerebral football players that can understand, take what they do in walkthroughs and in the classroom and apply it on the field with one rep without needing a ton of rep equity to go out there and execute at a high level. So he evaluates really smart football players. He evaluates football players that have tremendous knee, hip, and ankle flexibility. Why does that matter? Well, you're less likely to get injured. And if you look at Indiana's track record over the last 2 seasons, they've lost very few players to injury. So while they don't have the depth that some other programs have, they can scale their depth with versatility because they've only lost 1 or 2 starters along the offense and the defensive front, which is amazing. And they've lost very few guys on the outside for an extended period of time. So that's number 2. And then number 3, he goes and get guys that, and Bryant Haynes, his defensive coordinator, summed this up beautifully. He goes and gets guys that want to win more than they want to be drafted. And that is a really interesting thing because he might go out and get the 5'9" corner that likely doesn't have a high ceiling in the NFL just because of his length or lack thereof, but he's a tremendous competitor and will do everything that's asked of him. And guys, often when you watch Indiana, they play within the scheme. They don't improvise. They don't try to do too much. They do exactly what they're told. And in some cases, that means taking themselves out of the play in an effort to free up one of their opponents to make the play. That's rare in college football, especially when it's the me, I world that we're living in with these individual players. They have a collective group that are willing to do the little things right in order to find success. So I think he's done those three things, and that's why Indiana's in the position they're in.
Yeah, there's no question. This guy, he identifies. I wonder, and Greg, you knew him better. You know him a long time, but he can get a chance to coach Power 4 till he's 62, and he sort of comes with a chip on his shoulder. Like, I'm good enough. There was no doubt. He got it. The day he got hired, he went to the Indiana basketball game and went out there to be introduced. And I'm sure they could care less because it was like the 40th guy that had come through. And he says, Purdue sucks. And so does Ohio State and Michigan. And I remember we laughed. It was like, all right, here we go. This guy just poked the draft. Like, this is crazy. But guess who won the Big Ten championship this year? Wasn't Ohio State and Michigan. So I think he finds those guys with that chip and that work ethic. And it's a very good point that Greg makes about the practicing and then about the team guys. And I would even extend it back. I know Ohio State and Michigan are not plucky Indiana, but if you look at those two teams, they were loaded with mid-round draft picks, much like this Indiana team. Yes, there were some high-end, great first rounders, but when Ohio State lost to Michigan last year and the whole world was falling apart, that team came together and said, we don't care. And they went out and won the championship. They didn't crumble. If those guys are just there for contracts, if they're just there for the draft, do they go out and win the 4 games? That Michigan team was extremely tight, same thing as Ohio State, returned a lot of guys. And throughout the chaos of the 2023 season, Jim Harbaugh suspended, Connor Stallions, all this stuff, those guys were like, yeah, we're playing for each other. We don't care. And you still have to have team to win, whether you're a big name school or an underdog thing. And I think those ones will go further.
When I think about Cignetti in Indiana, I think a little bit about Billy Beane and the A's, right? And maybe they've been better at evaluating talent in all the ways you just laid out, Greg. What happened in baseball, though,
with fewer resources.
Yeah, well, but this is my question, right? Is the Cubs and the Red Sox and everybody else then figured out how to evaluate baseball players better, and they have resources, then they had money and better evaluation. I wonder, do you think, Greg, is Cignetti going to be able to keep doing this? Is Ohio State and Michigan to figure out his recipe and then just throw a whole lot more money about, and building teams the same way?
Well, I think we all become enamored with the guy that flashes from time to time. And with all due respect to the players at Indiana, I've watched some of those play. Like, you look at their defensive line, and how often have we been trained to think, well, great defensive linemen, they're going to be at LSU, they're going to be at Georgia, they're going to be at Florida, they'll be at Texas, they'll be at Penn State, right? Well, they're getting guys from Western Kentucky, Kent State, Texas State, James Madison. Like, that's the core of their defensive line. Last year, they had an unbelievable player that had transferred in that no one had ever heard of, but fit what they did really well. Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama and the top tier high level programs that can recruit the high school player, they're naturally going to probably gravitate towards the guy with the higher ceiling. Whereas Indiana's like, forget that. We'll take the guy with the higher floor and let's just go, because their fans are not going to be beside themselves if they miss out on the 5-star player that grew up right down the road. I think their fans kind of just trust Cignetti. Meanwhile, if Ryan Day passes on a 5-star wide receiver from Toledo in favor of a 3-star receiver that might fit what they do better from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, the fans are going to lose their mind. They're going to say he doesn't recruit. They're going to say, what is he doing? So I think that's part of the challenge. The other thing too, at those other places, like at Alabama, at Georgia, at Florida, at these other places, you don't have the same type of staff continuity that Curt Cignetti's had. He's had his offensive and defensive coordinator with him for the last 11 years. And Mike Shanahan and Brian Haynes took a job at IUP making $8,000 and $6,000 respectively in their first year. That was 11 years ago. And this year, Brian Haynes just signed a contract that will pay him on average $3.1 million a year for the next 3 years. And Mike Shanahan will get paid between 1.6 and 1.8 over the next 3 years. Those guys are remarkably happy with their current situation. So they haven't left naturally because they remember what it was like 11 years ago. We asked Brian Haynes, how'd you get through it? And Sean
They don't
McDonough
have to
asked
leave
him,
anymore.
"What'd
They
you
don't
do?"
have to go to Alabama or Georgia to get that contract anymore or to win
100%.
anymore.
They're perfectly content. So their ability to recruit to exactly what their needs are, because they have honed in their process of installing offensive and defensive football, is amazing. They don't spend time thinking about how should we do this. They already know exactly what curveball needs, how to throw the curveball after they've thrown the fastball, and how to adjust off the curveball to the splitter, and how to adjust off the splitter into a cut fastball. Like, they know every pitch that they have and how to use it within the arsenal, depending on what the batter is trying to hit them with. So I think staff continuity is also very important here. And we don't get to see that at places like Ohio State, who's constantly breaking in both coordinators, at Texas, who has a new DC this year, at Bama, who's had a new OC this year, at Georgia, who's had a new OC. Well, they've had a little more continuity, but not a ton. So it's not easy to do, for sure.
It's also interesting, right? Like, when you think about the laws of unintended consequences, right? That we're sitting here talking about what's going on with Indiana to a lesser extent, but still a large extent with Miami, the impact of not only the transfer portal, which is a tool, but the transfer rules changing, which really is, what this is all about, not sitting out, et cetera. Did we see this coming? Wasn't the conventional wisdom the rich, the very rich, were going to get even richer? That they would be able to stockpile with their resources, and instead we're seeing those who are nimble, those who are adaptable, taking advantage of the system in a way that I don't know if we want to call the most elite programs ossified, but in ways that they didn't think they had to do. It's just it's a fascinating dynamic right now, Wetzel, and I'm just blown away by everything we're seeing.
Conventional wisdom in college athletics is usually dead wrong. It just, I mean, you go back through
and everything the NCAA says.
A long history of what are you even talking about?
Right.
It did not surprise me at all. And I'm going to use this guy's name, and I don't mean to, not that he's going to care, but Urban Meyer was on his podcast recently saying, I got this totally wrong. I thought the rich would get richer. And Urban Meyer is one of the greatest coaches I've ever seen. I don't think he's an economist. Okay. If you talk to anyone who was an economist at the time, or anyone who kind of understand business, football coaches see the world through a straw. And so that they care only about what's directly in front of them. Okay, just think of your own life, right? Your neighbor says, hey, like proximity to talent matters, and how nice an office is matters. But you could be in New York City in the greatest office in the world, and your neighbor's like, hey, I'm moving to Muncie, Indiana. And they go, why? And they're like, well, they're giving me a 50% raise. And you say, oh yeah, you got to go. Right. That's how it could be 10%. But why'd you leave this company for that? That's money takes away some of the hurdles, geography, allegiance to maybe a growing up, being near mom and dad. It changes the dynamics of how it's just straight economics. This is economics 101, really. But college athletics was just like, Alabama's going to buy everybody. And it's like, wait, they have money at Boise State. They have money at Kansas State. They have money at Michigan. They got more billionaires at Michigan State. What we're seeing is Alabama doesn't have the money. It's right. The exact opposite.
Greg,
and so why don't you go to Texas Tech? Well, it's not because Texas Tech's not a great place to go to school and they don't have fans. It's just it's a long way from everybody.
Yeah.
But now it isn't, because it doesn't matter. So it was always going to be wrong. And the portal was going to spread stuff out. Guys want money, but they want opportunity to play. Number one, I mean, Greg, you're the athlete here, but you don't want to. There's guys just sitting there going, I'm never going to play. I'll sit here for 5 years. I'm a backup QB. I never made it. Or, hey, you know what? Maybe I'll work hard, get my degree early, spend the next 2 years at wherever. They want opportunity going down to play, and guys going up. They sit there and say, I grew up and I wanted to play at Alabama. I wanted to play at Ohio State. I want to play in the Big Ten. I wanted to do this. And they didn't like me when I was in high school, but they like me now, and I'm going to take that shot. So the more the water is going to find its level, and the more freedom of movement, the more this will increase.
There are still built-in advantages, though. I mean, we can pull the wool over our eyes. There are built-in advantages to a place like LSU or to a place like Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Ohio State. I mean, naturally, and we've seen this several times, and a lot of coaches have implemented this into their recruiting transfer strategy, is that if you are from a talent-rich state, oftentimes guys will leave at a high school, but the second time around, they are far more likely to come back home. We've seen this happen in places like North Carolina. We've seen it happen in Georgia. We've seen it happen in Alabama, Ohio as well. So there are still built-in advantages. And if it becomes a authentic NIL, the big brands are more than likely to land those national marketing campaigns that would pay these guys top dollar. I mean, the likelihood of Julian Sayin, the quarterback for Ohio State, landing an AT&T deal is far higher than that of an equally great quarterback that plays for NC State. It's no disrespect to NC State. It's just the brand that is Ohio State, and having a Buckeye sticker on your helmet is beneficial. So there are still built-in advantages, but I agree with a lot of what you guys are saying. 95.9% of what you're saying. I think a big thing that this has to do with is part of practice. Guys used to be content, and you could make this case all the time. 1 year at Ohio State was better than that of 3 years playing at Wake Forest. Just it was better from a draft prospect standpoint. It was better. The likelihood of you getting seen or recruited or evaluated at Ohio State was higher than that of being at a smaller school where there's less talent surrounding you, and you have a better chance of popping and starring when the collective talent around you is higher. That's the reality. But that's now going away. And I think teams are sitting there saying, hey, you can come here, and because you can't practice the way you once practiced, you can play here and you can develop here. And the only way you're going to develop now with how we're practicing is by playing. So you can come play, become a better player, and then at the end of the day, you can either go to the draft or go somewhere else, but we're going to find a place for you to become your best self. So that's what a lot of these teams are doing, and a lot of teams are finding great success doing it.
There's also an element, though, right? We're talking about the ways this has benefited athletes, giving them options. But there is a darker side to it, right? There is a side. We don't talk about the stories of a lot of those guys who go into the portal and lose their scholarships and nobody comes calling.
Yeah.
There is, what is it, a poison chalice element of it too. And so for those athletes now, for all of the successes, there are a lot of people who find themselves not only on the outside looking in after having had a scholarship, but pushed into that portal, as we've seen from high profile coaches. The whole relationship between the program and the athlete, which, let's face it, for 100 years was entirely one-sided. All the power was on one side, but there was kind of it felt anyway that there was kind of an obligation to maintain a relationship. Now it's purely transactional, right? And a lot of guys are getting hurt. Is that fair to say?
I think that's absolutely fair to say. I think think of the teammates of the player that transfers, or the guy who thought he was going to have the job when someone transfers over to take it. The system doesn't work well for a lot of players as much as it doesn't work well for coaches, as much as it doesn't work well for fans. And I think, yeah, there are players being hurt by it. And to me, all of these problems and issues are the symptoms of a system that is still trying to pretend that they're not paying these guys to play football when they're very clearly paying them to play football. And I think once you have a little bit more,
they're not employees. So
yeah, they're not that's the central problem, right? And I'm not trying to dismiss it as one that's really simple or easy to solve. It's complex, or else it would have been solved. There are a lot of nuances to finding the right answer to it, but you aren't going to fix any of these other symptoms until you get to a point where you can be honest about why you're paying these players. And in the meantime, it's going to hurt a lot of other players, because you can't have strong contracts that protect a player as much as they might protect the team. You can't have a strong someone who serves in the role, even if it's not a union, someone who serves in the role of thinking about the betterment of most of these players who don't have superstar agents, of making rules that are going to protect them and protect their spots on rosters. Until we get to that point, you can try to find as many sort of halfway quick fixes as you want, but you're just putting a finger in the dike, and it's going to spring a leak somewhere else.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of, there's kids getting run off teams, no question, because this is how it works. And maybe in the past they weren't because there wasn't an ability to bring in a replacement so easy. Maybe it was because you had to maintain ties with, say, you came out of a program that produces a lot of talent and the school would recruit that area all the time. You don't want to, anger that community. Nowadays, that's less of a thing. We saw Dabo Sweeney try this, and he would say, I always said, it clearly has not worked, but he was treating his players that he recruited the way you would want a coach to treat you or your son or something like that. He'd say, I'm going to stick with the guys who once committed to me and I'm going to develop them. I'm not just going to, hey, I can bring in a replacement that's 5% better. You're out. And he's tried that. And, it hasn't gone so well. And so that's kind of unfortunate. So I think that's an unfortunate bit. Guys that are jumping in the portal thinking they're better than they were. I don't know how many of those there are that don't end up anywhere. Some of this stuff is hard to legislate bad decisions. Like people make bad decisions. People all the time.
Right.
Every one of us went to college and we knew all sorts of guys that made all sorts of dumb decisions. That were doing dumb stuff in college. And you're like, maybe you should embrace this a little more. Maybe not. Maybe it's me. Really was the issue. But
I mean, you're right.
But you learn from it. So
when you give people independence, you're also giving them the right to make mistakes and to make dumb decisions and decisions that are not going to ultimately benefit them. That's the nature of what we're talking about, right? And
that's college, right? You don't.
Yeah, and I think
you shouldn't drink beer on Tuesday
make mistakes. Like those are learning experiences that great. I think the thing that would be great to find a way around is making sure the right people are in their ear, or you don't have a half a dozen people with really bad intentions in their ear. And I do think that's something that you can put some legislation around to try to help. I mean, you're always going to have the uncle down the street or the guy who coached the youth team trying to whisper in your ear and get you to transfer or tell you there's something better on the other side of the fence. But to the extent that you can put the right resources around 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are making these decisions, I think it will help curb some of that.
I'll say that it hits close to home. Just knowing these guys, covering these guys, you guys are with them a lot as well. There's a lot of tentacles to this discussion. Number one, for example, is a guy that played pre-NIL, finished up college football as a 2010 graduate. What I've talked to a lot of people ask, what would you have made in NIL? Probably a ton, like probably a lot of money, right? But at the same time, like my NIL will last the rest of my life. Like I live in the city of Birmingham, Alabama. I will be able to profit off of having played at Alabama the rest of my life. Whereas a lot of these guys right now, because the relationships and the frankly, just the level of connectivity between the alumni base and the network and the actual player itself, it doesn't exist. Like it once did.
And that's all true, Greg, but there aren't a lot of Greg McElroys. You were the quarterback for a national championship.
100%. But there's teammates of mine that are also benefiting greatly from having played for Coach Saban. Didn't even play in some cases, but were on the team. So, and I see those guys all the time, and it's wonderful that they've had such the career that they've had. So, yes, a lot of it is front-loaded NIL, which is challenging. And the next thing is, when you graduate, where are you taking your kids? Are you going to have a relationship with the school like we did? I don't know if that will happen as well. And then the other angles of this that I find very, very disturbing. Yes, it's nice to have a lot of money up front. That's amazing. Like to start on third base when you enter the professional workforce is incredible. We all can want that for our children. We can all want that for everyone that we're around. But let me just paint a picture for you. And this is a mental health conversation. You have, for the last 4 years in playing college athletics, you have been making in excess of $250,000 a year. And that's a lot of money, right? Maybe over the course of 4 years, you've made $1 million, which is like, that is mind blowing to think about. I think I lived like a king for $900 a month. It was unbelievable, but then you get done playing, your eligibility is exhausted. You have no prospects at the professional level. You just weren't that type of player. Good college player, but not a pro. A lot of guys fit that mold. Well, they are now entering the workforce in many cases at entry-level wages. So they go from making $250,000 as a 21-year-old junior to now making $32,000 as an entry level person on staff. And there are a lot of players right now that are really struggling with that. Not just that they were kind of developed a spending habits that were unsustainable, but they're struggling in the thought that like I've failed. Like what happened to me? Like what I was doing this. Now I'm making 1/8 what I was making as a college player. So guys are struggling with that too. And that's actually having an impact on players that people don't realize. And then because of the amount of transfers that they've had to endure, and maybe they didn't actually secure their degree, which is ever prevalent, less and less guys are actually making progress towards receiving their degree because they're going from place to place to place. So you not only don't, in some cases, have no college degree, but you also are now making 1/10 of what you were making for the last 4 years. And it's creating a real problem mentally for a lot of these guys as they enter the workforce.
Who's responsible for that? I struggle with, are these 22-year-old guys young men, or are they kids that need to be protected? And I think both of those strong stances have some flaws to them. Who's responsible for the fact that they may not have prepared or understood that this was the best it's ever going to be? And how do you try to address that problem?
I don't know. I mean, I think we all know, as Dan was saying, Wetzel, when we were in college, were we really adults? We were legally adults, but did we have the ability to make these kinds of sophisticated decisions that would have an effect on the rest of our lives? I didn't. I didn't know what I was what I was doing. And I think it's difficult for people who are young. Of course, they're old enough to vote. They're old enough to serve in the military. They're old enough to make these very big career life decisions, but it's hard, right? You're just not as smart as experienced when you're that age as you would be older. And a lot is being thrust upon them. You'd rather have the money than not have the money, though.
Of course.
But that doesn't mean that there aren't ways you're affected by it.
Yeah, it's like an unfortunate byproduct. I don't know how you legislate it. I mean, you want the schools to do their part. You want the players to be smart. I mean, just simple stuff, putting, a Roth IRA for $7,000 a year, starting when you're making I mean, if you could walk out of college with what, $35,000 or whatever in a Roth IRA at 23 years old, I mean, it's going to be $1 million, right? Like, so simple stuff like that. If you can walk out of college and say, I've got money to buy a house, or I've got my retirement set because this is just going to cook, and now I'm starting, that'd be great. But again, can you make that adjustment? It's tricky, but I don't know who at the end of the day, that's how the world works. I don't know at the end of the day, how do you legislate against that?
I interviewed recently AJ Storr, the guard at Ole Miss, right? And we're talking football mostly, but this is also applicable to basketball. So he's a freshman at St. John's, a sophomore at Wisconsin, a junior at Kansas, and a senior at Ole Miss. Without missing any time. Like, this is just a different world, right? That was something that seemed, we'd never see something like that. By the way, he's graduating early. I don't know how he's doing it. But
That's great.
It's very impressive. It's very impressive. One last thing before we wrap this up, and this has been great. Nobody knows more about this stuff than you guys. But when you think about, again, coming back to Indiana, the story of the moment, the biggest story in sports right now, what Curt Cignetti has achieved in 2 seasons there with these teams, all the guys who've transferred in his first year from JMU, the guys this year. If you're a coach and you really want to win, why would you waste your time at all on high school recruiting? I mean, like, obviously to some extent, but like, you've got this body of work that you can judge at the college level. You've got more physical maturity. You've got all of that. It just seems if you're allotting your time as a coach now to where you're going to recruit, how you're going to build a team, high school seems to be a losing proposition. Or am I overstating it, Greg?
Well, I think you live by the portal, you die by the portal. For example, last year, Indiana had the 25th ranked portal class, according to some of the publications. You average them out there's so many different publications. You average them out, though, around 25. Meanwhile, LSU had the number 1 portal class unanimously across the board. LSU fires Brian Kelly 6 games into the year. Curt Cignetti's in a really good position to win his first national championship. And I think in all likelihood will be unanimous Coach of the Year award winner for the second consecutive season. So yes, it's nice to sit there and go all in on the portal on a year by year basis, but in reality, you're at the mercy of who's in the portal. And there is no guarantee that there's a Fernando Mendoza just sitting there waiting for you to come and get him. There is no guarantee that there's a deep arsenal of defensive linemen that fit what you do. So I think it's still, you jumpstart the engine by going to the portal because you need to change the culture and you need to win now. You don't have time or luxury of having time now to perform and to produce and to start young and get better as you get into year 3 and 4. You don't have that luxury. You got to do it. So you got to start in the portal. But I think over the course of time, you wean off the portal and it goes high school recruiting. And then you supplement some of the issues that you might have on your roster with portal additions, because there are years where you think Auburn's a great example. Last year, we're going to go in the portal. We got the team. All we need now is the quarterback. And they go in the portal and there's no quarterbacks that are capably going to run their offense at the level that needs to be run. And as a result, Hugh Freeze loses his job 8 games into the season. So I think that the portal is a very dangerous game. And while, yes, on paper, when it works, it's beautiful. But there's a million examples of teams that have not gotten what they needed out of the portal and therefore underachieved. So it can be dangerous to play that game as well.
Yeah, I think there's a base you want. And we've seen, like, Colorado's tried to go just portal heavy. And it hasn't quite worked, particularly in football. You got to have a base. So you want that mix. But there is less. You should take less high school kids. And you don't need to reach on the last 5 guys of your recruiting class. You maybe save that money, save whatever you want on it. And some of those guys have then trickled down. I know there's a lot of talk about group of 5 guys losing players, but at the same time, they're getting recruits that they might not have gotten before. Football is kind of a little different, but if you look at basketball, and I would say to anybody, go look at the ESPN top 300 in basketball. Basketball teams only need about 7 guys, and they want to be old. Rick Pitino says, I'm not recruiting anyone from high school anymore. They're not signing 4 and 5 man classes anymore. You can look in the top 300 and the top 75. They're still going to Duke and Michigan State and Kentucky or whatever. The top players are still going to go to those schools. You get to 100 to 200, you're going to see VCU, Siena, High Point, Liberty. These schools all have big, like, top 200 recruits committed because they have sold the player on, look, you're 18. You're not going to be able to get on the court with a bunch of 22-year-olds at, Duke, unless you're Cooper Flagg. You come here, play for a year or 2, put up some numbers, and then you leave, and you're going to make big money. And so you're actually seeing in college basketball this weird phenomenon where the 100 to 200 level player are signing at schools that probably haven't signed a recruit that high in decades, just because they're kind of looking at it like this is the JV to where I'm going to get to. So it's kind of maybe more pronounced on that, but certainly high school recruiting is absolutely changed in football, but it's really changed in basketball.
Agreed, Dan. Yeah, I don't think you need to spend as much of a focus on bringing in 25 guys. And I think there will be less of a huge party in early February every year based on what your ranking is for a lot of these top programs. But I do think it's about, the two arguments for why you should still have somebody who knows what they're doing in high school recruiting. The first one is culture. You want to have people who are there for longer than 11 months at a time if you want to have the kind of sustainable culture that Curt Cignetti is starting to build at a place like Indiana. You can't have that if you're just totally, if you have a whole bunch of mercenaries in your roster. You don't have somebody who understands the place and what's going on. And the second is, college sports is professional sports to a lot of degree now, and it's an economic reason. You can get guys cheaper in high school if you pick a stock early in its first year or 2 before it's done really well, and you can pick that stock well. It's going to pan out better for you in the long run. It's going to be a good investment. So if you can evaluate high school talent well, you can potentially get it cheaper. And I think the combination of doing those 2 things well is one of the things that we'll see. The teams that do those well will continue to succeed.
One last thing, really last thing. So, these contract issues, right? These NIL contracts that we're seeing ending up in court or possibly going to court, whether Washington, Georgia, et cetera, the Williams and Wilson. If the schools really decide to enforce these contracts, how is that going to affect everything we're talking about, Greg?
Uh, it's so hard for me to even comprehend that because it feels like it's so far away. Does it not? I mean, I don't know about you guys because I feel like we're getting to the point where there's all this different language that are in a lot of these contracts that some have buyouts, some don't. I think there's multi-year contracts versus one-year contracts. There's incentive deals based on team performance, based on individual performance. There's so many different areas and ways to kind of look at these contracts. One thing that I do think that would be beneficial, and no one will sign up for this, but me as an idealist, why wouldn't we? Can we not just implement some type of universal contracts and then all that changes is the language? If you look at a lot of the NFL contracts, especially as it relates to the rookie slotted minimums that you see across the board that started in 2000, I believe it was 2011 draft, all these deals were pretty much universal. They were all the same language. Now, you had certain various degrees of guaranteed money and things like that based on injuries and stuff like that. If you came into the league with a prior, maybe you had something that you had to worry about. There's, of course, morality clauses, all this other stuff. But can we somehow, and you guys might be better positioned to answer this, is there a way to implement universal language to some of these contracts when it comes to keeping players at certain places or protecting schools from player movement? How do we handle that?
Got to be state by state, right? Every state's got their laws about contracts.
Yeah, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but the reason that exists in the NFL, which is a great system and beneficial to the players, is because it's collectively bargained. That's the reason why it's legal for every team to hand out the same contract to every player. Otherwise, that violates the same kind of laws that have been put in the NCAA in court and losing in court for the past decade. And I don't think a lot of the contracts now are going to stand up in court if they really get pushed long term. They're basically employment contracts that are pretending not to be employment contracts. So I do think at some point we're going to get to a head where some judge is probably going to decide whether or not these guys are employees and whether or not they can collectively bargain, unless somebody in college sports takes the bull by the horns and decides to be a leader and does that themselves.
Yeah, they're so far behind on this. And I think there's actually a mix here. I think what Greg's saying you could do, and I think the buyout of a multi-year NIL deal, that's really what kept Damon Williams where he was. Washington was going to make this thing so unpleasant that it wasn't worth it financially to leave. They had the ability to declare whatever the buyout would be. So at that point, I mean, every contract's just the start of a negotiation. You can, however you work. I don't care what employment contract you have.
You sound like Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, kind of like Lane somehow got LSU to pay him his Ole Miss playoff bonus. So Lane, when it comes to contracts, listen to Lane. That's pretty good. The collective bargaining needs to happen, but there's so many problems with that because some states, state employees are not allowed to be in a union. And so if you're working for the state school, like you have that problem. But the NCAA's waited too long on everything. They always fight the last battle 10 years too long, and they don't see the next one coming. The biggest issue of that maybe I think fans or people are upset about is eligibility now, and the NCAA is still trying to was fighting for amateurism like 2 years ago when everyone else had given up on that. And so they all say, well, eventually we can make them employees and then we'll collectively bargain and then we'll get everything we want. These players have no incentive. Right now, it's all on their side. They have no incentive to sit there and say, oh, okay, I'll agree to this now. Like the players have all the juice. Why would they all of a sudden agree that they can't transfer?
And they keep winning.
And they keep winning in court. And so the NCAA has bungled this because they're so stuck in trying to win the last battle that they never see the next one coming. And now I believe even with the collective bargaining, they have ceded so much ground to the players. Why would a players union, as disorganized as a college playoff players union would be, why would they ever agree to the stuff that the college administrators say, oh, we'll just get that. We'll get that done. Because it's better to be a free agent every year.
And everything we're talking about now, transfers and NIL and all the ways they can pay them with revenue sharing. Beyond that, eligibility could be the last, like the hill they die on, right? Like who says that it's written in stone that you can only play 4 years or 5 years?
That's a big one they got to get done.
7 years or 8 years.
Stay in college forever, right?
Right, college forever, like my experience. Dan Murphy, Dan Wetzel, Greg McElroy. Gentlemen, thank you so much. This has been truly enlightening.